All right, we're gonna give it 2 more minutes. Let folks make their way in and then we'll get started. All right, well, we're gonna get started. I want to make sure we're respectful of everyone's time because we want to make sure we get you out of here on time at 7:30. So thanks for joining. I haven't had a chance to meet you all yet. I'm Patrick Davis with Perkins Eastman. Looking forward to the discussion this evening. So just as a reminder, hopefully everyone's aware, we're going to be really digging into transportation and programs in particular. Obviously, last meeting we talked about enrollment in great detail. Today we're talking largely about transportation and programs. I'll just give you a little preview of what's coming up next. The next meeting will focus on facilities. And then the subsequent meetings, we're going to talk about how all these things are connected and start thinking about what we're going to do with all the information. But today, again, we're trying to sort of continue to build the knowledge base here in the room so that when we get to the strategy development portion of the work, we're all working from similar information. So we're gonna go through a lot today, but the bulk of today, we really want to make sure we're in conversation. So we're gonna do a little bit of a brief introduction in terms of laying a foundation in terms of data, some national landscape. Hopefully we're gonna have a chance to look at recording earlier, but we'll go through that quickly. We're gonna go through a little bit of data around transportation and programs, specifically at MPS, but also specifically within the Southwest region. And then as you can see, the bulk of the time we're going to spend going through some discussion questions and then report out, and then we'll wrap up with some next steps. So just quickly, just a reminder, hopefully everyone has access to this. If you are struggling to access materials, let us know, but everything's being posted on the Google Drive. Just a quick show of hands, anyone have trouble accessing information? Okay, if you do, obviously send us a note. We'll work you through it, but we're putting all of the materials, notes, slides, all the recordings, all of that will continue to be posted up there. And I'm going to turn to Larry. I think one thing we've been doing is updating the community insights form. So we just want to give it a quick download of some of the limited information we're getting through that.
And so we got a couple responses from the Southwest region from the form. And as this kind of goes on and people learn more about it, we're going to have more information that might be coming through. So we'll just do a high level overview of it. But in response to last month's meeting, there was comments about having clear information for parents and students about the administration and different schools that they could have access to. And then also focusing in on kind of the struggles of neighborhood schools and how they are not kind of comparing to some of those specialty program schools that people are sending their kids to. And then focusing also on a consideration, there was a couple comments about the facilities themselves, which we'll be getting into in the next meeting that we're doing. And then also just a little bit of a focus on a couple different schools were outlined by one of the people who responded. And yeah, just kind of a focus on transparency of information and kind of increasing access to those materials.
So as these continue to come in, we'll make sure you get access to them. We want to make sure you have the feedback we're getting directly. So we'll make sure all these things get posted on the Google Drive as well. But we thought we'd just do a quick summary. But like I said, we're going to do a very quick review of the national landscape around transportation and specialty programs. And then we're going to dig into some MPS specific data. And like I said, dig into some of the Southwest region in particular. So I'm gonna go through this relatively quickly. I will say there's a recording of this up on the Google Drive. So if I go through something too quickly, we can talk about it, but also if you want to watch the recording and spend a little more time with it, we have all the resources linked and shared as well. But I'll go through this relatively quickly. So as we talked about, we're going to focus on transportation first. So just this plot is just showing average transportation costs around the country per pupil. And we can see that Wisconsin is somewhat in the middle of the cost. We have areas like DC and New York and Connecticut that are paying more per pupil, but on average, Wisconsin's paying about $558 per student to transport. We'll talk about what that means here for MPS. Here, this number is a little outdated. Actually, the total budget's closer to between 60 and 65 million. This was from our proposed budget, but the transportation network and system is about 4%, a little over 4% of the overall MPS budget. So we're in the 60 million, 65 million range in terms of cost. But when we look at the per pupil costs, you know, the Wisconsin number was around 550. Look, you know, cost here in Milwaukee is much closer to that national average of $1,100 per student. This is 2022 data, so obviously costs will continue to increase as time goes on. But generally, Milwaukee is tracking a lot closer to the national average and certainly paying more per pupil to transport kids when compared to the rest of the state.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure. And I should also say we've got David here is with the transportation department. So
Here's my question. If the state of Wisconsin is averaging 500 some odd dollars, assuming that includes rural areas where you've got much more distance between houses where you're picking kids up. In Milwaukee, we've got a much higher population density, so you're gonna have an efficiency of picking kids up in close proximity to one another. Why is our figure double what the state average is? Where's the discrepancy in what I perceive to be an efficiency
certainly curious of
of
David.
the city?
One thing I would say, there's a higher proportion of special education students here in the district, which tends to come at a higher cost to transport. So there's a lot more special education students. While there is density, what we'll talk about today is students are traveling all over the city. So there's not, you know, there's a little less sort of continuity in terms of routes. There's a lot of movement of students across the city, which adds complexity. But David, I don't know if you have any thoughts on sort of
The first one you nailed right there is just the proportion of special ed in Milwaukee in particular is significantly higher. So obviously that drives cost up when we talk about average cost there for the district, that is including both the regular ed and the special ed components. I'll say this, we have an environment of choice. So as much as we think that we are kind of feeding individuals to a particular school, that pattern is probably overstated. There are choices. We've got a lot of specialty schools that kind of, again, inflate some of the costs. So if you break it up into specific categories, attendance area schools, specialty schools, citywide schools, you're gonna see some variance there with respects to the cost of transportation. And I would probably lean towards making a statement that if we were just to take traditional schools, things that don't have specialties, we would be much more in line with the state average.
Does this also include school districts that don't provide transportation? So there's like suburb school districts in the state that spend maybe $10 a student because they're only paying for special ed transportation versus regular.
Yeah, so
This figure's per each
student,
of the ones that are transported.
it's per.
Right, it's not
pupil.
deleted
Correct.
over the
Rider
non-transported.
Per rider, so it's per
per
student
rider.
transported.
Okay.
So in the case
I
of-
looked at that twice because
Yeah, I know.
I
'cause
thought
I
of
was
that too.
thinking-
So I can tell you, if you worked in DC, DC is really high because they only bus special education students. So there's a higher cost. Obviously, there's a lot more complexity that goes into special education, transportation, smaller buses, smaller routes, things like that. So, but yeah, this is per pupil transported.
That makes sense.
I was just interested how that breaks down between like K8, K5, middle school, high school.
Yeah, I don't have it right here, but we can certainly come back with some of that disaggregation. Because I do think, well, we'll talk a little bit about the travel distances by those different grade ranges here. Obviously, travel distance has a connection to transportation costs, so we'll talk about it a little bit, but if we can probably drill down a little deeper in the cost component and circle back. Just want to keep this moving because I do want to make sure we leave a lot of time for group conversation. With that said, you know, continue to ask questions as you as you have them. Just very quickly, I think just because it was such a national conversation during COVID, big driver of transportation and sort of attendance challenges during the pandemic were related to bus driver shortages. Obviously MPS, but pretty much every district around the country faced driver shortages. And obviously that created operational challenges. With that said, and certainly you can list some of these resources, but certainly MPS felt that. But I think, and David, correct me if you feel differently, that is starting to change a little bit. We're starting to see more participation of bus drivers where that's becoming less and less of an issue. So it became a national conversation, but I think through hiring efforts and whatnot across the state and the region is becoming less of a challenge. Obviously, it's still something that needs to be thought about. In general, what we're showing here is just the shifts in modes of transportation around the country. This is from a Washington Post article in 2024, where we're starting to see more and more families at all age ranges taking private vehicles. Obviously, during the pandemic, a lot of families are reluctant to take public transportation or school bus transportation and relied on private vehicles. So the x-axis is showing years old, so the age ranges. The darker line is 2022, the lighter line is 27. So we see an increase pretty much all age ranges in terms of utilizing private vehicles, and then a decrease in school bus, and public transport remains relatively flat, but that's not evenly distributed across different socioeconomic categories. What we're showing here is the difference in terms of educational attainment for families. So generally, nationally, families that have a parent or a guardian that has a 4-year bachelor's degree or higher, you see a much higher take of private transportation. So a lot of families are driving their students to school, and then obviously fewer students are taking the bus. Where parents don't have a 4-year degree, that's a lot closer, where pretty much the same proportion of students, around 40% of students each, are taking school bus and private. So obviously education has some connection to socioeconomic status. So the use of private vehicles and school bus does tend to vary based on educational attainment of the family. So transportation is obviously a big topic. It's something, while it's only, 4% seems relatively low, but $60-something million is a lot of money. Districts are always trying to think about how to, be more efficient and better maximize the use of those dollars. So districts are starting to really think differently about transportation, whether that's utilizing new technology to make more routes efficient. To Colorado Springs is starting to use some artificial intelligence to improve their route efficiency. Other places like Chicago are leaning more into alternative methods like carpool sharing, ride shares, things like that, as alternative measures to traditional school bus. So just a quick preview on some of those things. And obviously MPS has started to think about changes. One of the big changes was the recent school start time changes. The MPS, and David can obviously elaborate further, but as a 3-route tier system of more early, sort of middle and then a later route, but that's moving forward largely. And David, tell me I'm wrong, but I think it is really not budget driven. It's more about student achievement and educational reasons. To make sure kids can get to school on time, get through security, but that shift is certainly something that'll impact student arrival. So school start time change is something that's being evaluated, and certainly something we can talk more about as we get into the discussion. Just jumping quickly to the program side, where we're going to spend a lot of our time today thinking about these specialty schools. So specialty schools have really started to be part of the national conversation since the 70s. In many ways, they started to help desegregate schools to provide access to the different types of programs across the city or cities around the country. And that's had varying levels of success. While the intent was good to desegregate, it hasn't always resulted in the results that were anticipated, where still today, or as of 2018, 2019, I would imagine it's fairly similar, we still see 1 in 6 public school students nationwide still attending a school that has 90% of one race in the school. So while the intent early on was to start to desegregate, it hasn't always had an impact. With that said, it's certainly something that's providing access to different types of programming. And MPS in many ways is leading the field in some of these, especially Montessori programs. MPS has some of the higher amounts of Montessori programs around the country. But nationally, Montessori programs have been increasing pretty significantly since the 70s, with significant jumps in the 90s and the 2000s. So this is a little dated to 2014, but that trend I think is still continuing to rise, where Montessori programs in 2024, there are about 5,000 Montessori programs in the country. MPS is, as I mentioned, operating the most in the district. The other thing that we're seeing significant changes and rises in is dual language programs. So over the last 10, 15 years, dual language programs have essentially tripled, with Spanish speaking programs being the largest amount of those programs. Around 80% of dual language programs around the country are Spanish speaking programs. 8.6% are Chinese Mandarin. And obviously here in Milwaukee, you've got examples of other languages as well. But it's certainly something that's been rising around the country. The other thing that's been rising, and certainly see it here in Milwaukee as well, is the growth of IB programs, or International Baccalaureate programs. We'll talk a little bit about that in the Southwest region specifically. But again, this is something that's rising around the country as well. So we're starting to see more and more of these specialty programs coming into the conversation. The other thing at the secondary level, there have been rises over the last 10, 15 years in terms of CTE programs. We've moved away from what used to be the vocational programs and now offering career technical education program for many high school students who are entering some sort of professional pathway. This plot is showing the differences between Metro Milwaukee and Wisconsin, where Milwaukee has a little more business information technology compared to the state, and you can see the differences. But generally, CTE programs at the secondary level are also continuing to rise around the country. And then generally, this is a little bit dated, but I think the trends are still applicable, where generally what we're starting to see is fewer and fewer neighborhood assigned schools, or students attending neighborhood assigned schools, and more choice schools. So nationally, we're starting to see an increase in choice schools, decline in assigned schools or neighborhood schools. These private schools and home schools jumped up significantly during the pandemic. So we think this plot will change a little bit, but generally the trend is we're starting to see more specialty schools and programs offered in fewer and fewer traditional neighborhood schools from a proportional standpoint. So I'm going to go through this again real quickly. We just want to dig into some MPS specific data and then drill into the Southwest region just to set the table for us in the conversation. Generally, I think many of you have seen something like this, but it's been on the project website. Generally, MPS in particular, many students are not attending their neighborhood school. Roughly only 15 to 16% of students, down to 11% in high school, are attending their neighborhood school. So again, to David's point, significant choice happening in the district where families are not opting in most cases to attend their assigned neighborhood school. And what we can see here is just how students are moving and selecting schools around the city. So this map is showing the school board districts. There are 8 school board districts. And what we're showing here is the percentage of students that are attending a school based on their residence. So their residence where they live in school board district 1 through 8, and then where they're going to school. So we can start to see, given Southwest is mostly 6, 7, 54% of the students that live within school board district 6 are attending a school within school board district 6, 52% in school board 7. So about half the students that live in those 2 school board districts, or a little more than half, are attending their neighborhood school. So obviously the geography is a little different than the East region. But generally what we see is this bottom corner is essentially showing that if students live in school board district 6, 7, and 8, most of them are not attending a school north of school board 6. So we see a lot of students coming south. We don't see a lot of north movement of students from the southern portion of the district. And just to sort of build on that a little more, again, looking very specifically at the Southwest region, which we've got maps up here, is this orange region, obviously the group we're talking about tonight. And 77% of students that live within the Southwest region are attending a school in the Southwest region, which, as you can see, if you look sort of diagonally here, is the highest by far. Students sort of capturing, the region sort of capturing the students that live there. So 77% down to 42% in the central region. So generally the Southwest region is capturing the students that live here. And families obviously feel like they have access to a school that meets their needs within the Southwest region. So what does all that mean for transportation and travel distances? To your point earlier, students are traveling all over. So this is a pretty standard looking trend where students are increasing travel distance as they get older, but generally in the elementary grades, students are traveling 2.2, 2.3 miles on average. In the middle school grades, around 2.7, 2.8 miles. And then on average, district-wide, a little over 4 miles on average to get to high school. But when we look at the Southwest region, it actually tracks pretty well with that, the district-wide average.
Is this higher than the one prior just for students who are receiving busing?
No, it's any students, yeah. So yeah, as you can see, this looked very different. We had an East meeting last night where there's very significant differences, but in general, in the Southwest region to get to schools, the students are right around the district averages. We see a little bit shorter travel distances to get to the high schools in the Southwest region, but generally it tracks pretty well with the district-wide averages. Again, that's not true for all of the districts we're looking at, for all the regions we're looking at. So just to look at it a little bit differently, this is showing the percentage of students by sort of different distance bands. So in the Southwest region, the students that are attending schools there, 46% of students that are attending school in the Southwest region live under 2 miles away. 42% live between 2 and 6 miles away. And then 12% of the students that are attending a school in the Southwest region are traveling more than 6 miles to get to school. So, well, it's always interesting to look at averages. Looking at some of the spread and distribution of the data is also informative. Drilling a little bit into the programs, and then we'll obviously open up for discussion and conversation. Just at a high level, before we talk about specialty programs, I think one thing to really recognize about MPS is there's not consistent grade configurations. There's a lot of different grade types. So there's pre-K to 8, there's pre-K to 5, there's all sorts of variations on that, but generally, pre-K to 8 is the most common grade type in the district. Pre-K to 5 or K to 5, second, and then 9 to 12, obviously the third. There are a handful of traditional middle schools. So obviously with pre-K to 8 being the dominant grade type, you're gonna have fewer K-8 schools. So there's 7 traditional middle schools in the country, in the city. So when we look at the Southwest region, what this is showing is the percentage of schools by grade type. And we can see pre-K to 8 in the Southwest region outpaces the district-wide by a little bit. There's a smaller proportion of pre-K to 5 schools within the Southwest region, but generally there's not too much disagreement with the district-wide trends, where again pre-K to 8 is the most dominant school type, and then obviously some pre-K 5s and schools. When we start to think about the specialty programming, and I will say there's a handout in the back that has definitions for all of these program types. But generally, about 65% of all MPS schools offer some sort of specialty program, whether it's an AP program, an arts-focused school. I would say this is a whole school model, so the whole school would be a Montessori school, or sometimes there's pathways within a school. There's bilingual programs, college sport programs, community schools, CTE programs, dual enrollment, ESL, gifted and talented programs, international baccalaureate, language immersion, Montessori, and then Project Lead the Way. So about 65% of schools offer some form of specialty programs. When we see how that's distributed geographically around the city, we can start to see some differences in terms of access. So we've highlighted here the Southwest region. So the biggest sort of difference is the Southwest region has the significantly highest proportion of bilingual programs. So at 86% of the bilingual programs offered in MPS or in the Southwest region. IB is also significantly, so about 55% of the IB programs offered around the district are within the Southwest region. And then in general, I would say there's a higher proportion of specialty programs in the Southwest when compared to the rest of the districts and the regions in the city. And then finally, I think this is our last slide before we dig into some conversation. Thinking about travel distances by program type. So this chart plot's a little bit confusing, but if you look at the x-axis, that's the travel distance. So in general, I'll just sort of pull out an example here. On general, students travel on average 4 miles to get to an IB program within the district. And then on the y-axis, we're looking at the building utilization, or shorter enrollment against building capacity. So you can see IB again, students are traveling on average 4 miles to get there. And they're pretty in high demand programs where the buildings are close to 100% utilization. We look at another program type, which is on the other side, community schools. So students are traveling around 2.4 miles on average to get to community schools. And they tend to have a little bit of a lower utilization rate. So that's just how to read this. We'll leave this on the website if you want to dig into it a little further, but just understanding sort of demand and how far students are traveling, IB, dual enrollment, some of the high school programs in general, obviously are creating some more travel distance. And in terms of demand, IB and Montessori and the bilingual programs tend to be in schools that have higher utilization rates.
If schools offer multiple programs, are they represented twice? Like, how are they represented if they offer multiple?
Yes, they would be, if they have a sort of a pathway program, they're represented twice
Okay.
on the plot. So hopefully we didn't just dump too much on you, but we tried to sort of just lay a bit of a foundation for some of the conversation we're gonna have. So like we said in the start, we want to spend the bulk of the conversation or the bulk of our time today in conversation. So we're gonna, I think maybe we'll try to bring up David. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to add one comment. I don't know how I missed this, but we asked about the cost of transportation and related to distance as well. I mean, McKinney-Vento, particularly as it pertains to No Child Left Behind, was reauthorized early 2000s. Homeless displaced group home transportation has tremendously gone up, specifically in high poverty areas. So I don't want to pin a lot of the cost component and the per pupil cost on things just like special ed or specialty programs. It's a huge conversation to have to not include specifically homeless. It accounts for over 10% of the budget, and they clearly don't have 10% of the population in the aggregate.
Can you give like a 20-second overview of McKinney-Vento?
Well, school abortion. So it all revolves around when you're identified as displaced, that there is basically statute that really has a strong emphasis on keeping a student in their school of origin when they have experienced this hardship. I think studies have shown that every time you switch schools, you lose 8 months to a year of academic achievements. So the more you move around, the further you are falling behind relative to your peers. And so I think McKinney-Vento in particular, and then as it expanded to encompass foster placement, group home type of arrangements, has really grown, I'll say exponentially, as identification becomes a focal point, again, particularly in districts of high poverty.
Yeah, and again, probably to answer your question, Jeff, again, one of those reasons why I think Milwaukee is a lot higher than the statewide is a higher proportion of students experiencing homelessness in the district. So thanks for that, David. So we are going to go through, we'll have maybe these two tables combined, but we have these printed, and I'll leave this up here. But we want to have some conversation about some of the things we heard. I will say these are meant to start conversation. We don't need to go be sort of prescriptive about it. We'll go through and facilitate all of these, but we can take the conversation in many different directions. But essentially, we want to start thinking about a few different questions around transportation and programs. So the first one being just generally, we've seen the travel distances and we've seen some of the program distribution, but generally, how does transportation influence school selection? Are there strategies that MPS should be thinking about to equitably reduce reliance on transportation while lowering some of those costs? Two, how how can MPS better leverage city resources to support transportation? Are there key partnerships that should be considered? For example, use of county buses, which came up last night. Are there partnerships? We've heard from students around safety concerns about getting to and from schools. So a partnership might be something around safe passage. So districts around the country are thinking about partnerships with violence interrupters or police departments to create safe passages to school. So I was trying to think a little creatively about outside MPS. Are there ways to think about leveraging some of the infrastructure and systems that exist in the city, county? Number 3, we're moving more into the program side of things. Are there guidelines and factors that should shape how MPS launches or expands specialty programs? So obviously we've seen a lot of schools are offering these programs. What should be considered when going through that evaluation process to expand? But also, are there things that should be done to sort of evaluate the success of those programs? How do we sustain them? And then thinking about sustainability around sort of pathways, does it make sense that we need to have a clear pathway from elementary to high school? Number 4, is there a right balance of specialty programs in neighborhood schools within MPS? And what should be factored into that decision making? 5, we saw significant sort of people are not accessing their neighborhood school. So as we think about neighborhood schools, what are those things that would make them more attractive? How do we start thinking about defining what an excellent neighborhood school might be? And then 6, generally, are there policy changes or considerations that should be considered for transportation and program access? Are there innovative or outside the box things that MPS should explore? So these are really meant to start the conversation. Like I said, we'll go through them, but really we can take these in many different directions. So we'll use these as starting points, but really want to make sure we just have a robust conversation. So I'll pause and see if these generally make sense. Sure.
Can I suggest, the last time everybody ran out of time, started with question 1. Can we divide these even and odd questions or something between the groups so that we're not all working on question 1 and no one gets to 6?
I think there's probably curiosity from a lot of people on each one of them. I think from a facilitation standpoint, we can do a better job to make sure we're moving and staying track on time. If people feel differently and want to just split them up, happy to into that. But I do think getting perspectives from everybody on all of them might be informative. I think we can do a better job facilitating. So maybe these 2 tables can combine. Yeah, maybe we can create some separation. So
Look at me on the table, or you want me to bounce?
why don't you bounce? So just as a reference, I think I don't know if I clearly introduced David as executive director of transportation.